I asked the Prime Minister before I took to the podium if he was ready, and without hesitation, he said, yes, I'm ready when you are. I was heartened to hear those words because I'm looking very much forward to what he has to say this afternoon. On the programs that have been distributed, you have his biography. And since this is a university and all of you here are literate people, I won't read to you what you have in front of you. But by way of introduction, there are a number of comments that I would make. I have more than a passing familiarity with Kenya, East Africa, and that part of the world. Having first experienced life in Africa as a 20-year-old building churches in Kenya. Through my days as the United States ambassador to the United Republic of Tanzania. The Odinga name is legendary in that part of the world. Over the last 4 decades, no one from that family has been more located at the center of gravity of politics in Kenya and the region than former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. This past week, I was in South Africa and I was making a presentation at a conference on the future of the Democratic Republic of the Congo. And one of the issues that was at the core of that discussion was the extent to which democratization is taking place or not taking place in the Congo. And someone asked my opinion of how do you really define democracy? And I gave about a 5-minute or so response to the question, but then I concluded on this note, which I think is particularly relevant as I introduce the Prime Minister this afternoon. And that is, to be sure, elections and voting don't in total define democracy. It's not where democracy ends, but it is where it starts. And one of the hallmarks of a democracy is not how people are elected to office. One of the hallmarks is how they leave office. I've said on other occasions that, notwithstanding his long history of service in Kenya, that one of the more endearing tributes to the leadership that former Prime Minister Odinga has provided in Kenya might well be how he exited from office as a result of this last election. Often errors are defined by who wins, but I think history might well record that person who did more to save and anchor Kenyan democracy will be this gentleman, His Excellency Raila Odinga, for the very gracious way that he conceded the election and honored the decision of their courts. So it is without further ado that I ask you to stand and join me in receiving this Kenyan legend, this quintessential statesman, His Excellency Raila Odinga.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ambassador. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say that I'm very delighted to be here this afternoon. But I also want to say that it is something very undiplomatic on such a sumptuous lunch to begin to give people a long and boring lecture. I used to say the joke about the late Ugandan dictator, President Idi Amin Dada, the conqueror of the British Empire. He was invited to the Buckingham Palace by the Queen for lunch. And after eating, he was then asked to make some remarks to Her Majesty. And then when he began to speak, he said, Your Majesty, we have eaten too much that we are now fed up. And when you come to Uganda, we shall revenge. Now, let me first begin by thanking Ambassador Charles Stith for inviting me to come and be here with you this afternoon. And then I also want to recognize among you here, because he also recognized some of his distinguished visitors and friends. I'm here accompanied by one of our very celebrated professionals and also a politician, Professor Peter Anyang' Nyong'o, who is also senator in the Kenyan Senate. Peter is accompanied by his lovely wife, Dorothy, who is here. And Dorothy has just come from California, from the Hollywood. As you know, their daughter, Lupita, has been acting the slave girl in this latest film. So we are very happy to have them with us here this afternoon. Now, but let me say that with the African Presidential Center here, and with a diverse faculty and student population, I'm sure that you don't need long lectures on Africa. But my value to you may be the fact that you are hearing from an African who has tried to change Africa and whom Africa has also tried to change. I am happy to know and be made aware that there are other people who are not in the room who are also listening to what we are saying today. And I also, like the ambassador, I want to say they are all welcome to what I'm going to say. I'm also coming here from the country which has witnessed one of the latest elections. And I'm sure some people may want to hear about this. But I will share with you some quick thoughts on economy, democratization, governance, African unity, and the emerging security challenges on the continent of Africa. I'm talking to you here as an Afro-optimist. Afro-optimists as opposed to Afro-pessimists. Afro-optimists are those people who have confidence and believe that Africa can actually make it. The pessimists believe that Africa is a lost cause. And I belong to the former. Now, I want to say that I have been a victim of many self-imposed failures in Africa, which Africa is notorious for. I remain deeply optimistic that the day of glory for the long-suffering African people is within sight, and that the 21st century shall belong to Africa. This is not a hollow hope. As we gather here, Africa is on the march on all accounts, or most accounts. Sub-Saharan Africa, long seen as a lost cause, is witnessing steady economic growth. Africa is now the latest frontier in terms of economic development. And I can add here that by the World Bank's own statistics last year, of the 10 fastest growing economies last year, 6 were on the African continent. This is a result of macroeconomic reforms, strong incentives for the private sector, and progress towards greater democratization and good governance. Growth is also being fueled by the rise in commodity prices, access to technology, information and communication, discovery of mineral resources, and better access to improved quality of education. An African middle class is emerging, and there has been a surge of investor interest in Africa. In March of 2012, Kenya, jointly with South Sudan and Ethiopia, launched the 1,700 kilometer, what we call the Lamu Port, South Sudan and Ethiopia Transport Corridor, LAPSET. It's attracting a great deal of investor interest with this huge potential for inter-African trade. This project is supposed to move on and connect from South Sudan to the Central African Republic to the Cameroon port of Douala, connecting Douala in the West Africa and Lamu port in East Africa. That's connecting Atlantic Ocean to the Indian Ocean and opening the interior of Africa for trade. Kenya has lately discovered a number of precious minerals, and including oil and gas. This could soon surpass traditional exports such as agricultural produce and tourism to become the country's leading foreign exchange earners. There is a scramble for investment in this sector. Across the border, that is in Rwanda, Rwanda's debate for the 400 million euro bond, which was done early this year, was oversubscribed. Rwanda's appeal to investors is strong because of its strong economic growth, the low debt, and recent political stability. It is spending most of the money raised on infrastructure, including upgrading of its national airline, the Rwanda Air, and hydropower project. Part of the source of Africa's curse has been the inability to spend on priorities. In former Zaire, that is now the DRC, they once spent the hard-earned foreign exchange in staging a boxing match, which they call the Rumble in the Jungle. And then in the Central African Republic, neighboring there, one President Jean Bedel Bokassa decided to convert himself from a president to an emperor and spent millions of dollars in a coronation exercise. Other nations spent on monuments and surveillance on their citizens. Nearly every nation spent on larger-than-life lifestyles on their leaders, while schools, hospitals, and roads collapsed. The progress on the continent which has made in the last 50 years, under very mediocre, visionless, unaccountable, and hugely opaque leadership, really makes me excited about the possibilities for the next 50 years. However, a number of things still stand on our path towards greater prosperity and a brighter future. And I will focus on two. One is democratization and youth empowerment. A new Africa has been emerging since the Berlin Wall started falling in Europe. But this new Africa is facing fierce resistance from the old Africa. As you know, it was in Berlin where Africa was partitioned. The partition of Africa was done in Berlin. And therefore, it was very fitting that with the fall of Berlin Wall, changes then were also triggered off on the African continent. The wind of change which blew over Eastern Europe also began to blow over the continent of Africa, from Berlin. So I say that the shockwaves from the collapsed Berlin Wall forced the authoritarian systems that characterized most of Africa for decades to retreat. The big men were swept out in rapid turns from Zambia through Malawi, Zaire, and Kenya. Elections were being fought fiercely in an arena in which democratic aspirations of the people were largely reflected in the results. Where the authoritarianism persisted, it was rigorously challenged. Africa's grand march to democracy seemed irreversible. A section of Africa has kept the faith and is marching steadily in that direction. Botswana, Senegal, Ghana, South Africa, Tanzania, and Namibia are some of the nations in this class. But this march is being slowed down by what The Economist magazine of this last 12th October called the too many dinosaurs whose time ought to have passed. I do not want to mention names here. I invite you to pick the magazine and meet the dinosaurs face to face. What I cannot fail to mention is that the dinosaurs are inventing new tricks of survival. They are reuniting and inventing, and they are having also new converts to keep them company. They are revising progressive constitutions to give themselves more power and longer terms, while all the time tightening their grip on the nations. Even more important, the dinosaurs are inventing excuses for Africa's failures, blaming it on Europe and America, and therefore stopping the continent from facing its deficiencies head-on. These dinosaurs know times have changed, so they too have changed. They organize periodic elections, which they must win at all costs. They come up with very new constitutions, then tinker with them to suit their intentions. When they reverse the democratic gains, the ideological justification is usually framed in terms of Africa's uniqueness. Well, this is this because it is in Africa. Consequently, every cycle of competitive election brings with it conflicts and cries. Today, the threat of violence hangs over almost every election in Africa. Ethnicity is being politicized extensively, and it is having deep negative effects on the national unity in Africa. It determines whether members of different groups within the nation perceive each other as friends or as foes. It determines whether a regime stays at the top and whether it succeeds or tumbles down. Presidential elections are once again becoming zero-sum games in which the winners take all while the losers lose everything. This is the company I have been urging my country, Kenya, not to join and to stop trying to fraternize with this group of people. Because Kenya has always marched on by confronting its problems head-on, not by inventing excuses for our problems. This does not mean that I stand against the unity of the African people and African states. I believe Africa has suffered gross injustices. I believe we must stand with one another in Africa to tackle our challenges together. In fact, I am a product and a beneficiary of an Africa that once stood together. In my autobiography, and I have a few copies I'm going to share, you will find instances when I, just like my late father, travel on passports of different countries and not Kenya's. I'm a product of the kindness and unity of Africa in the bygone era. In a world of geo-economic and geopolitical tectonic changes today, I believe that only together as Africa can we force our issues onto the global negotiation table and ensure our interests are protected and promoted. But I also believe that our unity must promote the values, the hopes, and the dreams of our people and those of the entire human race. The values and interests must include respect for human rights and dignity, economic prosperity, national unity, and homeland security. I stand for African unity that ensures that as we liberalize our markets in line with the demands of the global village, we will get reciprocal concessions from mature economies. I stand for a unity that ensures that access for Africa's agriculture and commodities to developed economies to jumpstart the engine of our economic growth, a unity that ensures that Africa and Africa's natural resources are extracted for the benefit of the African people, and our human capital stays at home to serve our continent. Unity must ensure we reform our economies. It must be for growth and jobs. Growth is particularly necessary to remedy Africa's most pressing problem, which is unemployment. And rising unemployment is closely tied to Africa's growing challenges of insecurity and political unrest. It is politically untenable and socially unacceptable. In fact, studies including the World Bank survey of 2011 show that 40% of those who join rebel movements say they are motivated by the lack of jobs. This gets more worrisome given the emergence of rebel and terror-linked groups in Africa. I speak out against reversals and gains in Africa because they paint a picture that has a direct impact on Africa's economic growth. They indicate how unpredictable Africa can be. There's a common joke that no one can tell with certainty how an African country will wake up in a day, a month, a year. Unpredictability is an enemy of investment and trade. These challenges to democratization and excuses about colonialism and modern-day neocolonialism persist at a time the continent is home to the youngest population on Earth. Majority of Africans are younger than the continent, which is just turned 50 this year. 60% of Africans today are under 30 years of age. In fact, in Kenya, when we did a census, we found that 72% of our population are below 35 years of age. This young population knows little or nothing about colonialism. You get the feeling that they also don't care whether Africa was colonized or not. All they want is a sure path to a secure and prosperous future. They are increasingly well-educated, well-informed, and very restless, although they daily demand better education, good jobs, and freedom. What this means is that there exists a disconnect between the leaders and the larger section of citizens. These young people present not just a challenge, but also an opportunity. This is the group we ought to be investing in so that we can create jobs on the continent, combat climate change, prevent violent extremists from taking over, and spread democracy and development. Only with good governance, which comes with democratically elected government, will we be able to give them education, jobs, and opportunity, thereby lifting Africa. We have not done enough on this front. It is for this reason that I want to thank President Obama for the new program to bring Africa's most promising young leaders to the U.S. universities annually for training in public management, business, and civic leadership, which he announced during his last visit to South Africa, to Africa in June. Africa's youth will benefit immensely from programs that focus on the skills that they need to run better governments and to start and grow businesses and serve their communities. We in Kenya know what such exchanges can do for a nation. We know what the airlifts initiated by the late Senator J.F. Kennedy, later President Kennedy, did to put our country ahead of the pack in Africa. It is my hope that Kenyan youth will get chances on this program, and those of you here will be our ambassadors. As a Pan-Africanist, I believe that just like many other battles African citizens have fought in the past, we shall overcome the emerging challenges and take our place in the 21st century. I conclude by telling you that it has been a long journey up to where Africa is today. And we have made a lot of progress. You can see right now that Africa is looking much brighter than it was 20 years ago. Africa suffered because of the Cold War in those years. During the Cold War period, so long as you say that I'm an ally of the West against the war, in the war against communism, nobody cared how you run your affairs in your country. You could be doing whatever you wanted to do with your people, but you are an ally. And that is how we created the African dinosaurs, the big man syndrome in Africa, Monsieur le Président. That's how we created the Idi Amin of this world. He could kill people in Uganda, still become the chairman of the OAU. Mobutu Sese Seko, Kungwa Zabanga of Zaire. That's how we could produce Kamuzu Banda. We could produce somebody like Jean-Bertel Bokassa that time. But then with the Berlin Wall falling, then the wind of change began to blow on the continent. New vocabulary was now invented. Transparency, good governance, and accountability. So now new criteria was being used, and this has actually helped. A combination of external and internal forces sent those regimes going. And new regimes have now emerged. The political competition has come on the continent. Now you have got countries which are having periodic elections. Leadership is being changed democratically on the continent, albeit with some of the exceptions I've mentioned, the dinosaurs, which you will read yourself. But Africa is on the march, moving forward. And we do believe that this momentum that has been created now as we move on will help to change Africa. That we will be able to deal with the paradox that the richest continent in terms of resources has been the poorest all these years, because Africa's resources has been plundered and been used to develop other parts of the world. Now we want to make use of Africa's resources to develop Africa. We don't want to create jobs elsewhere. That's why we're saying we don't want to export iron ore and then import steel. We want to make steel from Africa and export steel to the rest of the world. The same thing we do with our copper, with our bauxite, we do with our gold. We can do it in Africa. If you say you want it, come and make it in Africa and create jobs for our African people. You don't want to export jobs to China, to Europe, to Americas. We have people who can do these jobs in Africa. And we also want to deal with the issue of the brain drain, of African intellectuals seeking green fields outside the continent, by creating a conducive environment that will help us to retain our intellectuals on the continent. And they will to stay there and work there on the African continent. This way, Africa will be able to reclaim its rightful place in the community of mankind as an equal partner in this globe that we call the Earth. Thank you very much.
We have, thank you very much. We have time for questions. Dr. Timothy Longman, who is, we need to get him a microphone. We need to get him a microphone, and then we'll have a couple of microphones available.
We'll have 2 microphones, interns with microphones.
Okay, and he needs one. Let me, while Dr. Longman comes up to the stage, we'll take time for a commercial break.
That's a hefty book.
It is a hefty book, but this is an autobiography by His Excellency, the Flame of Freedom, and he has certainly over the years been a keeper of the flame on the continent. I have been blessed and honored to have received a copy, which I've started reading. And as soon as I leave the lecture, I'm going to pick my book back up. It will be in distribution in the United States, hopefully within the next couple of months.
Next week, the electronic copy.
And next week, it will be available electronically. But this, for those of you who are students of Africa, who are interested in Africa, this book is a must-read. Again, Your Excellency, thank you for an excellent presentation. Give him another rousing round of applause.
So we can take questions from the audience, and also there are some questions that may be coming in on Twitter from the other colleges listening. Anyone have a question for His Excellency?
Sorry. Your Excellency, I would like to ask a question about our leaders, because I think that's what's been our problem, is our leaders not really believing in the countries that they lead, being patriotic. So what do you say about that, please?
Can I ask that people introduce themselves when they ask a question?
Oh, yes, I'm Ifeoma Onyefulu. I'm a writer. I write children's books. Okay, thank you.
Well, the leaders not having confidence. Of course, we are distinguishing between the other older leaders and the new ones. As in Africa, it's in a transition phase. We have a new leadership which has emerged on the continent, which is very progressive and very responsive to the needs of the country, their countries, and have confidence in Africa. But then you have those other ones, whose one step was in the continent, other step is somewhere in Europe. You see, those are the leaders, so that whatever they got in Africa found its way into Europe. And that's the reason why we are saying these days that we really don't want the AIDS, so-called AIDS, the AIDS syndrome. Because from the 60s going upward, a lot of money is pumped into the continent in terms of AIDS without much to show for it. So the AIDS pit became a bottomless pit. Money was just pumped in, but nothing to show for it. You can't see development. No roads, no schools, no hospitals, just impoverished people. Only debts. So you find that a number of those countries are heavily indebted. They're HIPICs. So you have children still in their mothers' wombs with debts waiting for them to inherit when they are born. So it just impoverished our people. And that's why these days we're laying more emphasis on investments and trade. But we want people to come and invest in the continent. And also other countries to open up their markets for our goods. So market access is very important for us as Africa. But those leaders without confidence on Africa are an endangered species. They are on their way out. And I'm sure that with time, they will all be phased out of the leadership in the continent.
Professor Hayward, there's Mike right behind you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. It was really stimulating. Some years ago, in 1980s, I was on my way to Europe, and I sat next to a Kenyan who was returning to Kenya after having studied or done research, I guess, at the National Institute of Health. And he was doing cutting-edge research, and I know he was going back to Kenya. I was really impressed, and that image remained with me. I haven't heard much about the health dimension of governance, and I wonder to what extent Kenya is in the forefront of, in fact, stimulating an innovative health questions that would, in fact, impact on the average person. Because when we saw images of some of the slums in Kenya, I wondered whether people had health services, and how is Kenya in the front of that? Because this young man who I met was really, we talked for the whole trip, and I was really interested in fact, how his training was being, invested in the development of health services in Kenya. Okay. Thank you.
Yes, of course, there have been many Kenyans and even Africans who have this sense of patriotism, who feel that, look, I have acquired this knowledge, and I should actually try to make use of this knowledge to help my other countrymen and women while I'm still alive. That is what actually derives people like the gentleman you are talking about, that it does not just want to be here in comfort and continue to be providing services to people who may not even be needing his services. You see, it's like a rain in the ocean. See, the ocean does not need rain. You need a rain in the desert, not in the ocean. In the past, we continued to actually urge the diaspora to come back home and work. But then most of these people had run away from the continent because of poor working conditions. You'll find that, for example, the government was not investing sufficiently in research and development, or, for example, provision of those services like education, like health, for example. In Kenya, we have what we call Vision 2030. Vision 2030 is an economic blueprint which is aimed at transforming the economy from a struggling third world economy to a middle income economy by the year 2030. And is anchored on 3 pillars: social, economic, and political. Okay? So on the social front is where medical services actually fall. And there is an aim to make Medicare accessible and affordable to all the citizens of the country. That is in the blueprint of our need. Now it is upon the government of the day to implement this program. There are benchmarks which have been set under the Vision 2030. And there's a certain percentage which the government need to invest in health on an annual basis. Of course, there are, the Millennium Challenge, Millennium Goals, but we are not even confining ourselves to those. Okay, there have been challenges, but areas where the government has invested very heavily in areas where to deal with the diseases which were actually treatable, like, for example, things like malaria, things like TB, and so on and so forth. We have in the audience here the former Minister for Medical Services, Professor Nyong'o is there. and he will be able to give you more details about where we are. But basically, I can actually speak with confidence, having been the Prime Minister, that the government is trying its best with the resources that it has to improve the medical services. He came up with the idea of making medical healthcare accessible through a comprehensive national national social health insurance scheme, an equivalent of Obamacare. He will tell you that he fully understands why Obama is going through what he's going through. He went through a similar process in Kenya.
Did your government shut down as well? I don't think so.
No. The president just.
Over here, sir. Oh, you better.
Oh, thanks, sorry. My name is Peter Varnum, and I'm a student at the Fletcher School up at Tufts. First of all, thank you very much for coming. It's an honor to be here. I appreciate it a lot. My question is on the violence after the 2007-2008 elections and the lack of violence now after the 2013 elections. And I know in both cases there was some miscounting of votes, but I wanted to know if you had any opinions as to why the violence was quelled after these 2013 elections as compared to before. Thank you.
Well, I talked generally about elections which are being conducted and which must be won by certain people. The 2007 elections, you know the outcome, was very nasty. That people contested the results. As a result, a number of people lost their lives. Over 1,000 lives were lost, and over 500,000 people were displaced. So we are still dealing with the consequences of that disputed elections. So this time around, we decided to go to court because we had, or we felt we had reformed the judiciary sufficiently that we will get a fair hearing. We went there, and when the judiciary, to our surprise, made the ruling that they did, we felt that we needed to accept the verdict of the judiciary, although we didn't agree with it. Just like Al Gore, Al Gore and George Bush, because you say, democracy is not like instant coffee, which you drink and you brew and drink at the same time. It's a process. So we said, look, may not be very fair, but in the interest of the national unity, in the interest of the nation, it's better to sacrifice our own interests, because you say that the nation is bigger than individuals, and that's the reason why we did what we did.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for coming to speak with us today. My name is Ivana Bikombe. I'm a student here at Boston University. You mentioned that the population of Kenya is very young. I was just wondering, how do you feel the young people in Kenya and in Africa can get more involved in the government to make it better? Or what can we do also as students across the world make Kenya and Africa better?
Yeah, I believe very strongly in the power of the youth. If you read this book of mine, you'll see that I'm dedicating it to the youth of Kenya and Africa, actually. Because in the youth you have got the vivacity, you've got the energy which we need. But I'm saying that we need to combine the two, the experience of the elderly and the energy of the youth together. Because I've not known any university where you go to learn, go get a degree in experience. You have to live it. But you need to pay more attention, and that's why you need to empower the youth right from beginning by developing facilities for education, right from the nursery through the primary to secondary education to higher education. First, we want to deal with transition at every stage, because in the past we've had a situation where very many children would drop at primary, and then the others drop at secondary. But if you improve the quality of education, then you have higher transition coming up. So you develop the skills, give them the skills so that they can be productively engaged, either as private citizens or as people who are employed in corporations, in government, and so on. See, this, we have got models that we can follow in Africa. There's no need to try to invent a wheel. See, China has got now it is aging, but a very young population. And they imparted skills on this young population. So that now, when they liberalized, they became very attractive. That's why many companies went to China to go and manufacture there, because you have this manpower there. I've been saying that, for example, it is cheaper to manufacture Mercedes-Benz in China and ship it to Germany and sell it there than to manufacture it in Stuttgart, in Germany. So, but now China is becoming more expensive because the society became more affluent. The incomes, the salaries are increasing. So a vacuum is being left down here by China and India. And that is what we want Africa to fill. Where China is moving, Africa can move in there. But we can only do that if we first have good, highly skilled manpower that is trained, and the youth. Because that youth can be a blessing or a curse, depending on how you look at it. If they are trained, they are a blessing, because they will participate in wealth creation. But if they are unskilled, then they will become delinquents, drunkards, robbers, thieves, and so on. So it's better to invest in the youth, so that youth can help us to create wealth on the continent.
Sir, right here.
Yeah, my name is David Mundia, and I'm one of those Kenyans who are in diaspora. And thank you, Mr. Prime Minister, for the good work you have been doing to enhance democracy in the country. I know there are big issue in Kenya about our two leaders who have been indicted in ICC, and I know so many of us we just want to go around it. And this is due to the rigged elections in 2007. And there has been a sustained effort by African Union to make sure that these cases are deferred, or they are not heard at all. Yet the same country, and I know you talked about it when you say that Africans, there are leaders who are dinosaurs, who really want to make African governable in a certain way. Nobody is talking about the victims, people who died there. Everybody is concerned about the two leaders, and they are saying that we should respect the presidency. You have also been accused in certain areas that you have not been focused in this area, in that field of being against this, because you are also interested in learning for presidency in the next election, and you want to gain to get votes from those communities who these leaders come from. I would like to hear your thought on this. Thank you very much.
Well, I am on record as being very clear about this issue. I have said that I have nothing against these leaders, the president and the deputy president. And they may be innocent for what I know. But what we are saying is that, you see, what happened in 2007 needs to be brought to an end in a way that will reconcile the society, so the society moves on. Just like the way they did it in South Africa. Restorative justice rather than retributive justice. But this is an issue for Kenyans. Kenyans must actually deal with this issue as Kenyans themselves. That's why I was against the ICC from the beginning in Parliament. The other people, of course, opposed it. That's why we ended up in the ICC. But I've been saying that the African Union completely misses the point. And of course, you know the people who are now got more voices on the African continent, on the AU. If you want to have Mr. Robert Mugabe as a role model, then I'll tell you, I'm sorry, I'm not in that league. The thing is that AU need to talk about more substantive issues that really concern the continent. This issue of ICC is something that cases have already started. Even if you get a deferral, it's just deferral meaning just you're postponing the cases by 1 more year. That not resolve it, because the cases will continue. If you say the cases be dismissed because these people are now leaders, then it means that you can do whatever you want to do, just become a president. Then you are secure. Okay? So that itself will set a very dangerous precedence for the continent generally. So what we are saying is that if these people are innocent, there must be some other people who are guilty. And the people who are guilty need to be brought to justice. That's why we're saying that it is not the responsibility of the African Union to get there. And secondly, it is wrong to try to say that ICC is targeting Africa. ICC has never targeted Africa. Mr. Milosevic, the former president of Yugoslavia, was not an African. He died in The Hague being tried. The former prime minister of Kosovo was charged. The former president of Argentina was charged. Those are not Africans. And Africa is the one which has taken itself to the ICC. I was the AU mediator in Cote d'Ivoire. I talked with Mr. Gbagbo, pleaded with him to relinquish power, to go into exile. He refused. When the French came, he was arrested, put under house arrest in Cote d'Ivoire. They put him on the plane and flew him to The Hague. The Hague did not go to get him from there. Africans took him there. Mr. Bemba is there because the complainant is Mr. Kabila, the president of DRC. Mr. Kagame, 3 months ago, put a general on a plane and sent him to ICC. Mr. Museveni, the president of Uganda, has contracted FBI to help him to track one Mr. Kony, arrest him, and send him to ICC, to Hague. So now, if it's a Ugandan, it's good to take him to The Hague. Then Hague is not interfering. Somebody else, Hague is interfering. Kenyans took ourselves to The Hague. I voted in Parliament against ICC. There are those who voted for ICC. Okay? But now we're saying that is the water under the bridge. The issue is that we need to sit down as a country and have a national conference and find a way of resolving this issue of ICC once and for all, rather than just deferral. Deferral will not help anybody. It will just confound rather than resolve the problem.
So, let's take you and then we'll take one from Twitter.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. I'm a student here in Boston University and I'm from China. I have a question, as you said, in our young generation, everything is changing, everything is different. And in our generation, where I see the word is getting more globalization. So I'm wondering how is Kenya gonna respond to this situation, in economics and business part? Thank you so much.
Well, Kenya is very much part of the global world. As you know, that the world has now become a global village, and you have to reform a number of areas. There are agreements which are negotiated globally, and you just have to be a part of it. You cannot really afford to isolate yourself. That's the reason why we are putting the infrastructure that connects us to the rest of the world. In terms of IT, you're very much part of the world. First, we begin with the region, our region, East African region. We have a community called the East African Community. Then we have a bigger region called COMESA, which brings East, Central, and Southern Africa. Then the African region generally, and then globally. So we are even connecting even our schools through the internet to the rest of the world, so that our students in Kenya can learn together with children in California, in China, and so on. We have got Chinese companies in Kenya. In fact, there's been a lot of complaints that the Chinese are taking too much in Kenya. I was told one time when I was Minister for Roads, I should disqualify Chinese companies from participating in the contracts because they're using slave labor. That's why they're too cheap. I asked, how do you know? I was told that, they're bringing Chinese prisoners to work on the road construction. And I said, but if the Chinese bring prisoners to work in Kenya, it means those prisoners have been freed because they are outside the jurisdiction of Chinese government. So we are very much parcel of the global community.
Take one of our remote questions. Can we take one from Twitter first?
This question from Your Excellency, thank you. We do have a question from Twitter on the ABC account. Given Somalia's shared border with Kenya, what can the Kenyan government do to prevent the extremist spillover?
Well, you were talking about the latest incident. I didn't mention it. The Westgate Mall attack, which was most unfortunate. And this was an attack organized by Al-Shabaab group in Somalia. We, of course, have learned our lessons in the past, and we were saying that probably we could have done better than we did. But we don't want to play the blame game. We want to move on and prepare ourselves better going forward. You see, in the past, we desisted from sending our troops into Somalia because we share a common border. The AU had also passed a resolution that countries immediately bordering Somalia should not donate troops. That's how it came that Uganda had troops there, Burundi had troops, but Kenya did not have the troops. But because we share the common border, we became the victims of attacks. There were sporadic attacks by the Al-Shabaab militia along our borders, our towns like Mandera, Wajir, Garissa, even the ports of Lamu and so on. So this was actually threatening our security. Our tourism industry was suffering as a result of this. So we reached a stage where we said enough is enough, and that's how we sent our troops to Somalia, basically to secure our borders. As once in Somalia, it became imperative to move more and more because we said that if we just move and withdraw back, the Al-Shabaab will follow. And that's why we liberated much bigger territory and captured the strategic port of Kismayu, which was the main supply route to the Al-Shabaab. Once we captured the port of Kismayu, the camel's back was broken. It was a matter of time. Then the Ugandans were now able to move out of Mogadishu. So now we speak, a large part of Somali land has been liberated. And people are now living a normal life in those parts of the country. Al-Shabaab is wounded seriously, but they're not completely out. And as Africans know, that a wounded buffalo is more dangerous than, than a whole one. We knew that it would charge. It is a question of when, not if, and where. And our intelligence was supposed to be alert, but somehow something went wrong somewhere. This is what we are trying to find out. What went wrong where? Who slept on the job? With a view to ensuring that there's no recurrence of what happened last time round. But I can assure you that we are there to stay until there is a stable and strong government in Somalia.
So, one last question.
Thank you, Your Excellency, for that speech and answering our questions. My name is Perry Tiemo, and I had an initial question. You did mention dinosaurs, and we all know there's a new dinosaur from China hungry for resources of Africa. And I am curious as to how African leaders are reacting to China's interest in Africa's resources. China has invested so far close to $1 billion in the Kenyan economy. So my question to you is, how should African leaders react to Chinese interest in African resources? Thank you.
In my view, Africa should act in Africa's best interests. Most countries, including the United States, always act in the U.S. strategic self-interest. See? Because that is what the U.S. will do. So you find the U.S. is there in China. You find the U.S. is there in Saudi Arabia. There's no democracy there. They're in Jordan, and so on, because of the U.S. strategic self-interest. So this is what Africa needs to do. See, Africa has suffered in the past. Africa's resources have been plundered, have been used to develop other parts of the world. If you go to France, you'll find African diamond and gold and everything there. If you go to Britain, you'll find there that Africa's wealth was used to develop the metropolitan England. And so on. Here you find Kenya's the man-eaters of Tsavo land in Chicago Museum. Huh? Now African oil is coming to this country from Nigeria, from Equatorial Guinea, and so on and so forth. So China is coming to Africa. China is coming to Africa to trade. China does not have the strategic minerals which they need for their industries. They need copper ore, they need iron ore, they need bauxite, and so on. Okay? So it's a question of what does Africa get in return? Because the iron ore is of no use to Africa underground. That oil is of no use to you underground. So you can't say it is my material and you're not using it. See, but if you use it to trade, you give somebody and it gives you something in exchange, then you're adding value. See, so it's a question of what does China give to Africa in exchange for getting Africa's raw material? More importantly, should you allow them to take the raw material, or should you force them to add value to it before it leaves the continent? This is the question that we need to ask ourselves. So in that way, you turn what would have been a disadvantage to advantage to Africa. See? So China is just one trading partner. But same thing will apply to the United States. And then it will apply to France. It will apply to Britain. Those countries have been in Africa much longer than China. And nobody is talking about that. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Prime Minister.
Your Excellency, before you take your seat for a moment, we have a small token of appreciation a memento that is Boston University specific to serve as a reminder of this great afternoon we spent together. Thank you so much.